My mother had been diligent in making sure that my life was as miserable as possible. That's the first statement. We know where this is going. I was never allowed to leave the apartment for anything other than school. There were no trips to the mall or skating rinks for me. Nothing that would help me fit in with the other kids. Still, eventually, I decided to make friends in my new hometown of Tampa to do some activities and have some fun outside the confines of our small 2-bedroom apartment. When I was 13, I found a best friend, Charlene. She was wonderful, and my mother, to my surprise, liked her. She was able to talk to my mother into letting me go to the mall with her. Charlene told her that her mother would be picking us up afterwards. I couldn't believe that I'd be pulling up and walking around without an adult. This was a new, liberating feeling, and I liked it. I finally felt normal. We spent 3 glorious hours window shopping, talking and walking around the mall. Charlene's mother was scheduled to meet us out front in less than 3 hours. We waited a while, and finally a car slowed to stop in front of us. I stepped toward the end of the sidewalk, grabbed the door handle, and stopped. It was not Charlene's mother, but a car full of boys I'd never met. When I turned to look at Charlene, she was smiling. She greeted each one of the boys by name. They're apparently her friends. Charlene introduced me to them as she got in the back seat of the car, pulling me along beside her. There were 3 boys, obviously older than we were, and totally out of my league. That's when it hit me. The story about her mother picking us up had been a lie. She had planned this all along without mentioning a word to me. So without any protest, I slammed the car door behind me and we drove off. I trusted my best friend. Charlene was one of the more popular girls in school. She dressed in the latest fashions and had a confident air about her. I looked up to her and wanted so much to be like her. Her mother would let her do almost anything she wanted, and she always told me stories about the places she went and the people she hung out with. Jealous of her life, I did everything I could to be around and fit in with her. Charlene also wore a lot of makeup. I was mesmerized because I wasn't even allowed to wear clear lip gloss, and she knew all about the hottest music. Charlene even gave me my first nickname, and we called ourselves sisters. That's what she were to me. We drove with these boys for what seemed like a short time, but I was unclear about where we were. I hadn't spent a whole lot of time out and about, and even though I'd lived in the city, I didn't know my way around. We ended up at the apartment of another guy, and in addition to the 3 who were with us, there were 2 more guys in the apartment. After hanging out a bit, I began to like one of the guys. His name was Ronnie, and I knew he liked me too. Everyone in the room was 17 and older, except for me and Charlene. The boys made me feel comfortable and accepted, so when Ronnie asked me to follow him, I did, right into the bathroom. It was tiny and cold. He asked me if I'd ever had schmex before, and I hesitantly answered no. I wasn't sure if this made me cool. He asked me if I'd ever had sex before, and I hesitantly answered no. I wasn't sure if this made me cool or not. I was hoping it wouldn't deter him from doing what I thought both he and I wanted to do. To my surprise, I was ready and definitely curious. I stared into his green eyes and ran my fingers through his curly black hair. He spoke to me in Spanish, and he hoisted my naked body onto the bathroom sink. I was shivering with fright, but also with anticipation. I felt a rush of adrenaline come over my entire body, and I began to sweat. I had never been touched this way before. I couldn't understand how or why I felt so prepared to lose my virginity to this person I had only just met hours before. So, not everybody wants to lose their virginity the Dawson's Creek way. For my Gen Zers, that basically means not everybody wants to lose their virginity to someone that they've been dating for years and years and years, you know. Some people just want to get it over and done with. Some people want it to be romantic. There's plenty of ways to lose your virginity. Just always make sure it's right for you and you are safe. Yeah, so she said, I couldn't understand how or why I felt so prepared to lose my virginity to this person I had only just met hours before in a strange bathroom, in a strange apartment, but I was. Somehow it felt empowering. I was drunk with the power of freedom. I wanted to stay out all night and didn't want this feeling to end. It did, though, when the piercing of pain of penetration made me realise what I was doing. Ouch. Ronnie placed me on the floor in an attempt to gain better entry, but to no avail. The pain was excruciating, and the pressure from his body crushed me as I became pinned between him and the floor. This was not the romantic scene I'd always envisioned. This was not right. Obviously, Ronnie had the same feeling, because after about 15 minutes of trying, he gave up. I was relieved, to say the least. We returned to the living room where everyone had been drinking and talking during our little experiment in the bathroom. Charlene instantly sat down beside me to get the details. After I told her nothing really happened, she seemed pleased. What I couldn't have known then was that she had a serious secret crush on Ronnie and was angered that he liked me. In her mind, I had somehow crossed the line. There was another guy in the apartment. Everyone called him Rodney. All I can remember about him was that he had extremely dark skin, was not very attractive, and had soulless eyes. After I came out of the bathroom with Ronnie, I could see in Rodney's eyes that he was now open season on me. It was now open season on me. Rodney stared at me intensely for a while, and I became nervous. I turned to Charlene to ask if we could leave, and just then, Rodney called Ronnie into the back room. I was uncomfortable. I knew something was terribly wrong. A few minutes passed, and my legs began to shake. It was getting late, and we were supposed to be home by now. If I didn't get home soon, there would be big trouble at my house. And as I expressed this to Charlene, she just blew me off. She didn't understand what kind of trouble went on in my house. She didn't have those kind of worries and fears. I couldn't go into details about the sort of consequences I would face. It was too embarrassing. So I pretended not to be worried. I managed to keep my legs from shaking and began to drink alcohol along with the rest of the crew. When Ronnie and Rodney emerged from the bathroom, the looks on their faces was unmistakable. Rodney had given the order, and from that moment on, Ronnie didn't say another word or even look in my direction. Rodney, weren't you? Rodney sat down next to me on the sofa, and my knees began to knock. For the first time ever, I just wanted to be home with my mother. Damn. Even though the sight of him was making me sick, he said the words I wanted to hear. We're going to take you girls home. It wasn't long before we all piled into the car. It was late, the sun had gone down, and I knew I'd be in big trouble when I got home. So I began bracing myself for the worst. Whatever the punishment would be, it would be better than being out with these people. Pissed. As we drove towards my street, I began to feel a bit relieved. Finally, I could see the 2-story structure I lived in becoming larger and larger still. Yet, as we got closer, the car moved faster and we sped right past my apartment. I alerted the driver that he had missed a stop. My apartment was back there, I yelled. Everyone in the car was silent. I was sandwiched between 2 guys, one of them Rodney, in the back seat. Charlene was pinned against the right back door. And when I looked over at her, she stared out the window as if everything was going as planned. I stared out the window with tears welling in my eyes. Then Rodney ordered, "Let's go to the house." I felt a sense of relief. If I could just get out the car, I could get away. I could run to a public place and get help. I was growing increasingly terrified. I was particularly scared of Rodney. He had that look in his eye. He was harsh and abrasive, and the other guys seemed afraid of him. He was in charge, and no one in that car would dare stand up to him. I was in trouble and apparently had no allies, not even my best friend. Eventually, we pulled up to a house. Rodney grabbed my wrist with all his strength and pulled me out of the car. The house was a monstrosity. It was a puzzle of brown boards in a sort of hexagonal shape, and its frame stood on top of 15-foot stilts. This house had obviously once been someone's dream, now abandoned. We had a lot in common, that house and me. Oh, that's sad. The street we were on was darkened by the lack of working lights. I looked around for a place to run, a house that looked friendly and inviting, a house with no gate to fumble with, no dog to deter me. I was planning my escape. We ascended the wooden stairways carefully. It seemed as if every other step was missing. The house was rotting with termites. And at the front entrance, there was a big gaping hole in the floor, through which the ground 15 feet below could be seen. As the crew moved past the dangerous obstacles, almost without looking, it was clear they had all been here before. Rodney took me to a corner of the house away from the others. My heart was beating so hard and so loud that I couldn't hear a word that he was saying to me. What was clear, though, was the strong hold he still had on my wrist and his slimy tongue wandering around my neck and face. So I'm going to throw up a trigger warning here, guys. I wanted to throw up on him. He licked and kissed my shivering frame. He lifted my shirt and roughly fondled my underdeveloped breasts before he began to unbutton my jeans. My right hand became numb from the grip he had on me, and I was beginning to cry. I cried silently, and to my disgust, my tears excited him. He began to ravish me, tearing at the stitching of my shirt and scratching at the skin as he tugged my pants. The neighbourhood dogs had been barking since the moment we pulled into the house, and by this time the neighbours were in their yard. I could hear them talking, wondering what was going on. My silent cries grew louder and eventually turned into a scream. "Call the police," I heard from the outside. Rory loosened his grip on my wrist and relocated it on my neck. "Let's go," was the order, and everyone barreled out of the house, down the stairs and back into the car. It must have been extremely late because there was no people anywhere as we drove around the city looking for a place to finish the evening. Rodney took a hold of my wrist again, and now he was mad as hell, with fire in his eyes. I could tell by the conversation in the car that Rodney, allegedly only 18 at the time, was a criminal and had spent time in jail. I was terrified and had become almost numb at this point. I stared blankly into space. My breathing slowed and I went into another place. I was back home in St. Thomas, at my grandma's house. I was picking the fruit from the trees, bananas, papayas, guavas. I was young again and safe. I could smell my grandmother's fish and rice. I was loved. The car stopped abruptly when Rodney gave the order. I opened my eyes and saw a motel. I was never going to get out of there, I thought. Rodney got out and unscrewed the bolts of the air conditioner of the courtyard-style motel room. He pushed the air conditioning unit into the room, crawled behind it, and unlocked the door for the rest of us. I just stared into space, a zombie. Exactly what happened after this remains a mystery to me because I was completely gone, back in a happy place. I do remember there were 2 beds in the room. Rodney and I were in one, Charlene and Ronnie were in the other one. They were talking and laughing amongst themselves, as if what was going on in the next bed was not disturbing. I was trapped under the covers by Rodney. As he lay on top of me, his right hand was around my neck, his left hand pulling at my pants. My next memory is of him inside of me, tearing away at my insides. I screamed and cried simultaneously. I clawed and kicked tirelessly. He took the hand from my neck and covered my mouth with the same forceful grip he had applied to my wrist. I could feel his hot, moist breath as he panted over me. A puddle of murky sweat pooled under my ribcage and in my navel. He was dirty. His body carried the odour of devious determination. I don't even know what that is, but I don't want any devious determination near me. I could feel my virgin skin ripping, and the pain sent strobes of lightning through my head as I overheated from panic. I couldn't catch my breath, and I couldn't fight anymore. He was winning, and I was losing.
much more than my purity. My insides weren't as inviting as he would have wanted. So the next memory I have of is of Ronnie giving the order to hold my legs down while he went to the bathroom. Oh my God. Oh my God. I was shaking and the look in Ronnie's eye was pitiful. He knew this was wrong, but he wasn't man enough to face Rodney. A few short seconds later, Rodney returned with something in his hands. He began rubbing his hands together and lather began to foam around his rough black fingers. Ugh. A few short seconds later, Rodney returned with something in his hands. He began rubbing his hands together and lather began to form around his rough black fingers. He rubbed soap into my torn flesh in order to gain lubrication. I screamed in agony. It burned as if acid were being poured directly into my lacerated cavity. Exhausted and relieved when it was over, I fell asleep. The very next morning, Charlene, who was now no longer afraid to be on my side, and I were the first to awaken. We quietly got dressed and planned our escape. Just then she pointed out a hideous hickey Rodney had placed on my neck. That man had thought of any way he could to mark and scar my body and scar my spirit. Just as we were trying to leave, the others woke up and stopped us from leaving. Rodney didn't try to restrain me from this point on. I guess he had already achieved whatever he had set out to do. And now he was simply hungry. A McDonald's was directly next door, so the plan was for us to walk over for breakfast. Charlene and I looked at each other and knew this would be our only chance to get away. We just needed to run as fast as we could, and that's what we did. As the guys walked towards the counter to order their breakfast, Charlene and I slipped into the bathroom. We took about 15 seconds to come up with a game plan and immediately put it to work. Opening the door and peeking into the restaurant, we could see the guys weren't facing our direction. They were off to the far right of us in line they were off to the far right of us in line, and to our near left was the door through which we had just entered. So as to not bring any attention to ourselves, we calmly walked out of the door and onto the sidewalk. Then, without saying a word, we both started running as fast as we could. The guys saw us through the window of the restaurant and began to give chase. By the time they made it to the sidewalk, we had already hit the first corner. Our hearts stopped when we realised that we had just run into a dead-end street. We could hear them running and calling out to us. We had to do something and do it fast. Next to us were a few cars parked along the sidewalk. Again, without saying a word to each other, we instinctively crouched down and slid under one of the cars. Seconds later, the sound of their feet stopped, followed by whispers. I couldn't hear what was being said over the sound of my heart beating, and in an instant, they just gave up and walked back towards the McDonald's. Charlene and I didn't trust the situation, so we waited a few minutes before we moved from under the car, then ran quickly towards the nearest payphone. Charlene called her mother and told her to pick us up on the corner. When she slammed the phone back onto the receiver, I felt this part of the ordeal was over, but I knew there would be something just as traumatizing waiting for me at home. You know what? As I've been reading these parts, I have been thinking she's out all night, her mum doesn't know where she is, and her mum is going to go nuts. And not in the normal parent going nuts, but in a super violent kind of going nuts. And this poor girl, I mean, how old is she? 13? Ugh. The ride back to my house was surprisingly calm. As I sat in the back seat of the car, Charlene and her mother were deep in conversation. What was so surprising was the tone of the discussion. Although her mother was obviously disappointed, she was still kind and loving. She listened, and when it came her turn to speak, she did it with more concern than anger. I wonder if Charlene understood how great she had it. And then I thought about what would happen when I walked through the door at my house. My heart began to race and I was having difficulty breathing. This poor girl has got no safe space. And the one friend that she made put her in this situation and did not even stick up for her. Let's continue. From the ride in the car to the long walk to the front door, I was blank. I don't remember anything clearly during that short. I did not mature in the way I should have. I was always nervous and always afraid. I had no confidence in myself and largely withdrew from everyone. I was so nervous I wet the bed and sucked my thumb constantly up until high school. The bedwetting happened every night without fail. Again, my mother was never concerned with the reasons why. She just made me feel bad and disgusting because of it. She verbally attacked me every morning when I woke up in a pool of my own urine, which only made me more nervous. This was a vicious cycle and I wanted out.